Good morning, everybody. This is telling me that I'm live, so hopefully it's not fibbing to me. Welcome to my channel and happy Friday, everybody. If you're in a part of the world where it is currently Friday, which I'm in Australia, so it is. It's the start of Friday though, but I hope everybody gets through their day and has a great weekend lined up. Basically, what I am going to do today is give you a brief update on what I achieved for. Don't mind me, I am actually just clicking on different screens here and lost my notes. Oh, here we go. I am just going to give you a brief update as to what happened with my January, how it planned out, and then I'll get on to some main business. But either way, January was a little bit messy, but didn't work out too badly at all. So the most exciting part, against all odds, my new novella is finally out as of today. So you can get your hands on it in a number of ways. I'll circle back to that at the end, which is what this live stream mostly will be about. The second big thing that happened in January was I attended a small convention, which is called GenghisCon here in Perth. I did a couple of panels, spoke to a few people, both writers and convention goers that were attending. As I said, it was small, but it was a bit of fun. So, and it was good to get out there. Honestly, here in Perth, there's not a lot on for the science fiction fantasy space, conventions for indie authors, panels and things like that. So it was good to dive into one. This is the second year that I've attended GenghisCon, and I guess my rule of thumb is, hey, it can't cost me money to attend. I've got to at least at the moment break even. And not only did I break even, I came out with a little bit on top, if I ignore the, fuel and stuff like that it took me to get there. Next up, what have we got? My new writing project, now that Against All Odds is absolutely finished, is Project Dragon. It's pretty new. It does not have a title, so that's my working title for the moment. I do have some thoughts already on what the possible title will be, but until I get this thing finished, there is no point really in going there, because anything I come up with now at this early stage probably won't fit by the time I finish writing the book. But if you've actually been following along, you'll know that I actually kicked off writing Project Dragon last year in November. I wrote 25,000 words, and between end of November and now, I'm doing bits and pieces basically, but it's currently sitting on about 40,000 words. So really unexpected. The writing and the words have been coming quite well for Project Dragon. I'm expecting it's going to slow down a little bit. I am rough drafting, but the reason it spiked up is there were two main characters. Well, one in particular, I followed through with that character, and I know a fair bit. So a lot of those words were based on a particular character in this new novel. And then the spike recently in the last week is that a second point of view character came up, and I do believe this character is also going to stick. They might even turn into one of the antagonists, which is odd for me, starting to write from the antagonist rather than the protagonist. I do have a couple of scenes for them. I just haven't developed or dived into them all that much. So now we circle back to the main business for today, my new novella, Against All Odds. Just so you know, there are two ways you can get your hands on it. The first is as a subscriber to my newsletter. So if you're currently a subscriber, check your inbox. You should have an email there from me, and contained within that email is a link for you to download a free copy if you would like to do so. The second way is that it will be up on my PayHip store. So you can buy direct approximately 99 cents, that's US. So Australian, that's about $1.50. So the price, I just automate it. You set one price and the system in PayHip will come up with prices for the rest of the world, depending on what the exchange rate is doing. It should be the equivalent, though, of 99 cents US in whatever currency you use. That's the second way. If you don't like either of those ways, you have a bit more of a wait. So it will be up on places like Amazon, Apple, Google, Kobo, Barnes & Noble. So the rest of the retailers, it will go up in March, mid-March. I will clarify the date a little closer to when it will go up. But for now, the two ways, my newsletter and direct for a small cost, 99 cents from my store. You can also, don't worry if you're not a member of my newsletter and you would like to, because you don't want to, you'd like to join up because you don't want to pay the 99 cents, you can still join my newsletter. If you go to my website, there's a banner about halfway down the first page that has the newsletter sign up. By now, it should have replaced the cover because it was Shattering Dreams as the freebie giveaway for newsletter sign up. It should have changed over now to Against All Odds. So if you sign up, don't worry, one of the things that you will get is a copy of Against All Odds. So let's bring this up. Well, there we go. So this is Against All Odds. Just so you're aware, there is no paperback version. I know there looks like there is. There isn't. It's just an ebook at this moment. I may do a paperback version at some point. I'm half toying with doing a Kickstarter and basically a low entry Kickstarter so I can learn the ropes. And if I do that, one of the, it will be my Emergence series. I'm dabbling. There's a couple of scenes that I missed out in Unwanted with how the series panned out, that when I'd finished it, I thought, oh, if I'd included these couple of chapters in Unwanted, it just would have flowed better. And then I could have put these couple of chapters in Sacrifice, tweaked a few things here in the final book, and it just would have rounded things off quite well. They're not essential, but I thought if I do a Kickstarter, I might write those. So that would be a part of it. So it's almost like a second version, new covers, and as one of the stretch goals could perhaps be a paperback version of Against All Odds. There would obviously be new covers if I did that. But let me just, so this is Against All Odds. The blurb, if I can find where I just put it. Oh, here we go. So Against All Odds, the blurb you will find is one man's fight to change the world. In a brutal world, escaping the slums to become a warrior is impossible until Paul. As he competes against a bitter rival, Paul must navigate the treacherous waters of loyalty and survival as his secrets are weaponized. His past threatens to destroy everything and everyone he's fighting for as the deadly scrutiny of the warlord targets him. Against All Odds is a gripping tale where the lines between good and evil blur, yet hidden in the depths of betrayal and vengeance, there is the indomitable will to break free, and the fight for survival becomes the fight for a better world. So that is the blurb for Against All Odds. And don't worry if, I don't believe there is anyone here, but let me just pull this up. If you do have any comments, please drop them in the chat and I will endeavor to answer them. But otherwise, oh, and if you would like a copy of the ebook, there's the PayHip store address. I'm sorry, I don't think that is clickable, but you should be able to type that in and you will find my PayHip store and you'll be able to purchase Against All Odds. Now, I'll read from chapter 1. So bear with me. I don't know that I read all that well, but we'll get into Chapter 1 of Against All Odds, and I hope you enjoy it. Chapter 1. Paul stared at the slums of Yaleska and wished breathing was optional. The sun was high in the sky, and without the hint of a breeze, the rank, fetid odor lingered and coated the back of his throat. He could taste it. There was a time when he hadn't noticed the smell. Yet now, as Paul surveyed the slums, it tasted all too familiar. Of a memory dredged up from his childhood, like home. The shapes of slummers, both children and adults, bent low as they sorted through the huge refuse pile. This had been his life once. Just like the current inhabitants, he'd searched for useful bits of garbage like metal, wood, clothing, and food scraps that weren't too decayed. The stench was a mixture of unwashed bodies, decaying plant life, and the rotting flesh of animals and humans alike. All of it discarded by the residents of Valenta town and the stronghold. This wasn't the only way to reach his destination, but it was the quickest. Off to one side, some slummers carried a fallen tree between them. A crack of splintered wood and protesting metal resounded as the group unceremoniously dumped a log on top of the mound of junk. With an increase in buzzing, a dark cloud of insects took flight, giving away that there was something dead underneath the refuse that they'd feasted on. Paul ignored them all, and, in blatant disregard for what crunched beneath his booted feet, he picked his way across the rubbish pile. There was no obvious path, at least not to outsiders. While the time when he lived in the slums was like another life, Paul still trod through the mess like a born slummer he was. He ducked his head as he walked into a makeshift burrow. Not waiting for his eyes to adjust, he concentrated, switching to his other side to push away the darkness. As he strode through the tunnel, Paul drew in the veil to replace the trickle of power he was using to augment his normal sight. It was an ability he had taken for granted as a child. It took him the longest time to realize it wasn't a talent the average person possessed, or at least not to the extent he did. The passage he followed snaked around, with offshoots leading away from the main trail he was on. A series of wooden planks formed a walkway on the ground, while the walls and roof were constructed from bits of tin. As he turned a corner, light blazed ahead of him, and he strode out the end of the tunnel into a narrow, hard-baked dirt alley that ran between makeshift huts cobbled together with anything the residents could get their hands on. Small branching lanes revealed more of the same. Paul stepped into a laneway, continuing his way through the maze of shacks. After a short distance, he walked through an archway in the stone wall. The gate had once locked outsiders from accessing Valentia town this way, had long since disappeared. On the other side, the path was better, if only just, than what preceded it. The buildings were constructed on The buildings that were constructed on this lane were 2, sometimes 3 stories high. A series of wooden ladders with walkways gave access to the upper tiers. Strips of multicolored tarps stretched between the upper handrails, providing some protection from the sun. "I'll get him this time." Paul heard the faint whisper of words traveling through the veil. While the thoughts of most people were fragmented, that one sentence was clear. Sandals slapped against the dirt laneway as a person had spoken rushed him from behind. He spun, arm rising to block the blow from the would-be assailant. "One of these days." "I knew it was you," Paul said, and opened his arms. "Ha! If I keep practicing, I'm bound to get the drop on you." Irene stepped into his embrace, her dark eyes scanning the windowless structures around them. "Let's get inside. There are too many eyes here." Paul sent his own warning pulse through the veil. The mental touch of those trying to work out if he was prey or predator flinched back. Irene rolled her eyes at him as she sensed his response to those that watched. Satisfied, he followed her along a series of walkways through the poor quarter of Yeleska. As she scampered up the ladder, he took a moment to scan his surroundings. It was a habit, even if it was a useless one. Here in the old section of Yeleska, it wasn't much better than the slums. The sheer press of bodies in the place was enough. The sheer press of bodies in this place was enough that the signs of life from those who lived here formed a single glowing mass in his mind's eye. Irene's forehead creased, and she gestured for him to follow. He switched back to his normal sight and made his way up the landing to the third level. Irene waited to make sure he was following before she ducked into a doorway. At the top of the rung, Paul took 2 steps along the walkway and entered what passed as Irene's home. He stopped himself short at his train of thought. At least she had her own shack. How Irene got the money together to pay for the shack was a question he didn't want to know the answer to. It didn't matter how tiny the hut was. He only had a cot, a shelf, and a trunk at the barracks, nothing of his own. The latch snicked into place as the door closed behind him. Paul handed the sack he'd been carrying, and at a gesture from Irene, he sat on the small wooden stool. "Thank you. Are you sure you won't get into trouble?" Irene asked as she peered into the bag. A bubble of delight burst from her as she pulled out a day-old bread, sliced meat, a wedge of hard cheese, and some fruit. "I'll be fine. No one will miss that. Besides, it's all left over from last night's banquet. The staff will produce a fresh meal for the warlord tonight, as there is every night. He doesn't eat leftovers." Irene's eyes were wide as her head rose from a bounty. "It goes to waste?" Paul shrugged. "Some of it. Those that work out in the stronghold get pickings of it first. The kitchen workers discard the rest." "What about the slaves?" "They don't get food like this. At best, if the handlers are feeding generous, the slaves might get some scraps from cooking the meal. Otherwise, they get gruel and water to break the morning and the day's end. Everyone in the slums would eat well if only we could take what the warlord discards," Irene sniffed. "There's a little more in there." Paul couldn't meet her eyes as he gestured to the sack. "I may have risen in station from the boy you looked after in the slums, but there still isn't anything I can do about how the world works." Irene bit her lip, then peered into the bag once more. With a muffled gasp, she reached in with one hand and removed a metal mug and a plate before setting them aside. Then she pulled out a shirt and trousers. They weren't new by any means, but they were in better condition than those in the old quarter would be wearing. "I can never repay you for all of this." "It's nothing less than you deserve. Besides, I noticed Aiden's clothes were a little too small for him the last time I was here. You won't let me claim him, but I can at least help." "You know very well I can't be certain who the father was." "I didn't know how to stop pregnancy back then." "You do now?" "Julie taught me a few years back." Irene hesitated, biting the side of her lip. "She's a good match for you." "Her father doesn't think so." "It's not her father who gets to make that choice." Paul ducked his head, afraid his cheeks would be flaming red. "We'll see. It's early days yet. With all the rumors, I'm surprised the warlord hasn't sent you out of town to guard the roads." "What rumors?" "You should head back via the market. You'll see it's much smaller this month. And everyone is whispering that bandits are attacking some of the regular trading caravans on the road between Manton's territory and here. While our esteemed warlord cares about a great many things, unless they carry Yeleska's seal and they die in a rival warlord's land, the fate of a few traders isn't one of them. Deaths of traders who belong to other warlords in Manton's holding would be Manton's problem to deal with, not ours. Not that I'm displeased to see you, but if you don't get going, you'll be late and get into trouble with your warlord. Wouldn't be the first time. Paul rolled his eyes, but stood cocking his head to one side. Your boy isn't out there sulking like he normally is. With the traders in town, he'll be skulking around the markets. Stay safe. Paul kissed Irene on the forehead and walked out the door. Thinking about Irene's comments regarding the traders, Paul made his way through the maze of narrow, twisting paths towards the inner wall. He navigated his way with an ease that only one born in this place could emulate. While the Paul Quarter had permanent structures, there were plenty that weren't. Those who lived here could and did erect what looked like permanent residence on the outside, but were all facade. It confused the guards or any outsiders who thought to come here. So the laneways were different today than what they'd been when he was a child. But he still recognized the markers. It was a whole secret slummer language utilizing color, a simple method of communicating that he hadn't felt the need to divulge to the warlord. Paul walked up to the wall and eased himself through the rock pile to the other side. His shoulders brushed the back of a series of wooden stalls that leaned up against the inner city ring wall, which served to separate the city markets and the residents from the poor quarter, to keep the sight of the poor from their betters. Once a month, this market tripled in size as it came to life as traders rolled through Yaleska, bouncing from town to town until they arrived at Callahan or the other direction to Valentia. The clamour of good-natured bantering and the industrious clatter of the market being set up covered any noise he made walking through the narrow passageway. Paul switched to his other side, scanning the other side of the colourful strips of linen. The signs of people sprang up in his vision. Since the life signs separated and merged, it was impossible to tell how much other than there were people on the other side in the square. Enough to mask his appearance as he pushed back the cloth and walked out between the stalls. As he figured, no one paid any attention to him. The local merchants filled these permanent wooden stands, not the traders from out of town. Unlike a normal visiting trader weekend, Paul had to concede there were plenty of gaps in the square. As Paul picked his way across the market, he scanned his surroundings. Not that he expected any threat. Most would avoid the trouble interacting with someone wearing the warlord's fighting leathers might bring to them. It was just an automatic habit born from a lifetime of practice. Any child who ran the slums learned to keep a wary eye out for threats, or they died. Get away. I don't need my wares tainted by the likes of you, a voice snarled, followed by a meaty slap and a cry of pain. Paul swung around and saw a boy sprawl onto the ground at a trader's feet. Coins tinkled onto the cobblestones as they spilled from the leather bag the lad had been clutching. His lips thinned as he stared at the coin pouch. Then, as the child looked up, Paul groaned. The boy was Irene's son, Aidan. Paul's sword was out of its sheath, and in 2 steps he slammed the trader up against the side of his carriage. Watch out who you mistreat, Paul said. Or what? The trader asked. I might kill you. You can't touch me. I bear the warlord of Callahan's seal, the trader said, smirking as he pulled a ceramic disc from his pouch that bore the stamp of a giant cat with a claw outstretched to shed its enemy. The Strafford warlord doesn't like it when people interfere with his business. It's unfortunate for you that the Strafford warlord is far away in his fortress in Callahan, and I'm right here. So how do you think he's going to save you? Paul asked, and pressed his blade a little harder into the neck of the trader. With the caravans that are being set on by raiders on the road, Callahan will notice how few of us roll into town. He'd find out that a warrior of Yaleska broke the trading accord. Besides, I have witnesses. You can't kill us all. Come on, Seb. We don't need trouble with the locals. The boy obviously had coin, another trader said, coming over and pulling Seb back. Paul ignored all the merchants who'd stopped to watch the altercation. He could kill them easily enough. The problem was, without Bryant's orders, he shouldn't. It was regrettable that the insufferable trader was correct on that account. Paul's warlord, who was right up the hill in his stronghold, might very well kill him just for killing Seb. If the news arrived in Callahan that Paul had broken the accord by killing one of the Strafford's traders, the odds of him dying increased dramatically. The warlord of the Callahan traders would cause more trouble than he could afford. The only thing worse would be if Seb carried the seal. If the seal Seb carried and thrust in front of him like a shield bore the stamp of the Rathadon warlord of Valentia. You think beating up potential buyers is a way to attract business? Paul asked. He's filth and will put off customers with better breeding. Besides, what's one like him doing with a coin purse? The boy stole it, Seb said. I don't hear anyone crying out about the loss of the belt pouch, Paul said, though he knew Seb was correct. There was no other way Aiden could have that kind of coin. What were you after, lad? Aiden scowled as he snatched up the spilled coins, then turned his back. Before the boy could take more than one step away, Paul spun a barrier of the veil in front of him. With a startled screech, Aiden hit the shield and fell back onto the cobblestones. I don't have time for your games, and unlike your mother, I don't love you. What were you looking to buy? Paul asked, his lips compressed as the silence grew between them, with nothing more than Aiden glowering up at him. As Aiden squirmed, Paul tightened his mental hold to prevent the boy from fleeing. With an inrush of the veil, Paul felt a buffeting against his shield and kept his expression impassive. It wouldn't do for Aiden to know Paul found his efforts to break free amusing. The match of wills and mental sparring continued for a moment before it finally occurred to Aiden he wasn't going anywhere until he answered. Those boots, Aiden said, panting from his exertions in trying to use the veil to fight. Paul eyed the trader's wares, then withdrew his sword, but not his hold on the boy. Leather boots are expensive. I doubt you have enough coin to purchase a pair. That money is better spent on food for you and your mother. Come on. I'll see you out before someone else knocks you around. With a final warning glare at the trader, Paul turned his back on Seb. He used the bonds wrapped around Aiden to haul the lad to his feet. Aiden's eyes grew wide at Paul's almost negligent use of the veil, and the frantic pecking at his mental shield stopped. Not trusting that Aiden wouldn't run off and get into more trouble, Paul kept a firm grip on Aiden as he marched the boy out of the market. And there we go. That was the first chapter of Against All Odds. Let me just flip my screen here. There we go. So I hope you enjoyed that. Let me also put this back up for you. There we go. Hope you enjoyed the first chapter of Against All Odds. That is my new novella. And that's all I have for you today. So please check out my books. You will find most of them actually on PayHip. That code should take you to Against All Odds, but on my PayHip store you will find all the rest of my books as well, or you can go to my website, catherinemwalker.com. They are all listed on there, including my store where you can buy them, but each of the book entries does have its own links to any of the retailers that you might like to buy a book from, if that is your preference. Also, don't forget, I will put it down in the description, once I get back to YouTube. I'm using Restream for this, so I'm not on the back end of my channel at the moment. But the audiobooks of my first series, The Being of Dreams, are up that you can listen to them for free on the channel. So please don't forget, hit that like button and subscribe, and we'll chat again for my update for the end of February. See you then. Bye, everybody.